Right, hello there, everybody, and the last Sherlock Holmes story is back with chapter 4. Sorry for the long break, um, and I'm sorry for last week's video as well. I forgot to mention in my last video. I knew what I had in mind when I wanted to do that video, but things happened, and I got kind of um, not adjusted. I kind of got completely went blank. My mind went completely blank, and I didn't prepare properly for that video. So, again, my apologies for last week's video. But we continue with the last Sherlock Holmes story. As an army surgeon, I saw much of the men who had sustained massive physical injuries. Those most severely wounded, strange enough, are often the quietest. The screaming or the withering are characteristic of less critical cases. The most grievous seem to be protected from the full awareness of their plight. A merciful trance descends upon their senses, and as they subsequently recover, they are very often unable to remember anything material from that period, when their lives were despaired of. I cannot help feeling that something of this sort must have happened to me at the moment I'm describing. Although in my case it was the spirit rather than the flesh which had received the mortal blow. At all events, I find myself quite unable to recount in any detail the manner in which I spent the holiday Friday. All I can recall are a few vivid impressions, lacking all sense and sequence. My memory, like an idiot messenger, had forgotten all the vital items while retaining trivia of no interest of importance. Thus, I propose a clear memory of sitting on a form in a poky room, lit by two oil lamps, so filthy they seemed to rather to absorb light than to give it out. I stayed there for I know not how long, downing glass after glass of some liquid which the old hag behind the bar described as gin, though it tasted more like medical spirits. After that, I am at a loss again. Where did I go? What did I do? It seems I fell on some wet tram lines and lay helpless for several minutes together on the cobbles. Later, I think, I tried to board a cab, but the driver, no doubt, dismayed at my appearance, cut me with his whip. There were crowds of everywhere by then, bells pealing, and processions with bands and horses, and men dressed up as if for an old play, while urchins run past screaming about horrible murder, and people whispered together with fear in their eyes. Then it's all blank. I came to my senses lying face down under a rose bush. The sky was dark and a strong wind was blowing. I felt shaky, but myself again. A row of lights indicated that a broad thoroughfare passed close by. A tall pillar rose into the stormy darkness, and I heard again the mournful whistle of the steam launch which had awakened me. The pillar I recognised as the obelisk, particularly known as Cleopatra's Needle. With some difficulty, I climbed the railings and dropped to the pavement. I stood for a moment under a lamp, inspecting my appearance. It was not reassuring to discover himself lying in a flower bed in a public gardens, without the slightest notion of how he came to be there, much proof of an embarrassment to any respectable person. The case is by no means improved when he discovers that his hat, his tie, his money, and all his watch are missing, that he's wearing his coat inside out, that his other clothes are all wet and filthy, and that his shirt front smells distinctly of cheap gin. By turning my coat the right way in, I was able to conceal the worst of my condition. And when Hansom passed by a few minutes later, I was able to get myself accepted as a fare, after a short parley with the driver. When he inquired as to my destination, I replied unthinking, Baker Street, and at once stroke the memory of what I had witnessed that morning came howling back into my mind. How was I to face Holmes? The thing was impossible, but I was penniless and completely unpresentable. Moreover, I did not quickly change into some dry clothes. I stood very good. I stood a very good chance of developing pneumonia. But what was I to do? 221B or not 221B? That was the question. By the time the cab had reached Baker Street, I'd arrived at an answer. I directed the cabby to drive onto the corner of King Street, and then run back to see if Mr. Holmes was at home. This he did, after some promised bribery. If Holmes was there, I determined to brave the stairs of my club. But I was in luck. My Jarvery brought good tidings for which he had duly rewarded, and a few minutes later I was brushing off Mrs. Hudson's expressions of alarm, which gratefully accepting the offer of a bath followed by something hot and nourishing. She had seen nothing of her other lodger. It appeared that there was a telegram for me on the table in the hall. She had seen nothing of... Right, okay. I read the wire as I climbed the stairs, and it had been dispatched from Dover this afternoon, and it ran this way. M. got by us in Whitechapel, but I've picked up by his trail. He is seeking to escape the continent, but he shall not escape me. Hold your ground, await further dispatches. Holmes. Relieved as I was to learn that Holmes' absence was to continue for some time, his cable was only intensified the mystery. I read it through once more, and it was beyond a doubt the voice of the Holmes I had always known, a man capable of the atrocities I had nevertheless watched him committing that very morning. For a moment I began to wonder if I could be losing my mind. Two equally strong and valid truths were firmly lodged in that organ, and unfortunately for its continuing welfare, that contradicted one another. The first was that I had seen Holmes cruelly mutilating the body of a dead woman. The second was that Holmes was Holmes, and such a thing was therefore impossible. I pushed this dilemma aside while I had my bath changed and ate the ample fare provided by Mrs. Hudson. But once my immediate needs had been taken care of, the larger question returned in full force, and would be no longer denied. Reconsidered the matter, including reconsidered the matter, inclining the first way, then the other. No sooner had I convinced myself that Holmes was himself the Whitechapel murderer, and his tale of Professor Moriarty blind, than all his instincts rose up and threw out such preposterous notion. But the memory of that barbaric scene returned, and I no longer knew what to think. Was it possible I had dreamt the entire episode? If so, the consequence for myself must be very serious, for I would have lost the use of my reason. But would it be any easier to admit that my best friend, my honoured mentor, with whom I had lived on terms with a great intimacy for more than 7 years, was a maniacal homicide? At length I realised that certain aspects of my morning's experience could be checked if there had been a murder. If there had been a murder, it would have been reported in the papers. I assembled the great mass of newsprint which Holmes had delivered to our rooms daily, and sat down and shifted through it. There seemed to be nothing to the point in the morning papers, but for a moment my sanity seemed to hang in the balance. But of course the reason was simply that the body had not been discovered until late morning. In the evening's edition I found what I was looking for. The victim was believed to be one Mary Kelly, 24 years old. The murder had taken place in Miller's Court, an alley of Dorset Street. The body had been mutilated in a manner surpassing description. There could be no doubt that Jack the Ripper had struck again, and with a ferocity and daring that eclipsed even his previous outrages. I was still reading the reports when the bell rang. It was 11:10. Holmes used to say that after 11 o'clock, callers were invariably either criminals or policemen. In this case, it proved to be the latter. I opened the door to Inspector Lestrade, who pushed past me with an assurance that comes with years of paying official visits. Good evening, Doctor. I hope you don't mind me calling late. I saw your lamp was lit. I was wanting a word with Mr. Holmes. I hardly knew what to say. Had the police discovered already what I could still not bring myself to believe? Holmes? Oh, yes, Holmes. Ah, no, he's not in. Holmes? Oh, yes, Holmes. Ah, no, he's not in. There's no... That's to say, he's out. Away, I should say. But Lestrade had already spotted the buff form, which he picked up and read without communication. Off to the continent, is he? Well. He looked up with me with a slight sneer. I'm determined to brazen it out. It will be well be well indeed if he succeeds in running this fiend to earth, I declared roundly. Or at least have not come away utterly empty-handed, Inspector. But what about you? Well, I certainly can't go running off to Gay Paris the moment things go wrong, if that's what you mean, growled Lestrade. As for Mr. Holmes' precious charts and timetables, I've had a bellyful of them. I felt immensely reassured. This was old Lestrade, and he clearly suspected nothing. Come now, I rallied him. You can't deny that Holmes predicted the murder attack. With complete accuracy, the detective sneered. So he did, Mr. Watson, so he did. Unfortunately, it wasn't the fortune-telling we were quite interested in so much catching the Ripper. We were quite... Sorry. So he did, Dr. Watson, so he did. Unfortunately, it wasn't his fortune-telling we were interested in so much as catching the Ripper. We were quite so successful there, were we, Mr. Holmes and had Miss Whitechapel... Sorry. We were quite so successfully there, were we? Mr. Holmes had Whitechapel packed with policemen, all except one little area, Spitefields, and that's where our Jack walked in, did his business, and got clean away, while we were all calling our heels at the police station. Well, at any rate, I don't know what became of you two. I avoided the question by offering Lestrade a drink, which he readily accepted, then assuring that I was quite ignorant of what had happened. He began to describe the scene of the murder. The funny thing is, all that happened in that same street that Mr. Holmes... The funny thing is, all that happened in that very same street that Mr. Holmes had his room where I sent for him the last time, right under his very nose in Dorset Street. Do as you please. They called it round there. Sorry. The funny thing is, it all happened in that very same street that Mr. Holmes has his room, where I sent for him the last time, right under his very nose in Dorset Street. Do as you please. They call it round there, and that's what the murderer did all right. I've never seen anything like it. He locked the door somehow, and he had to take out the window to get inside. And let me tell you, it is just as well I'd had my lunch before I went down there. For it'd all been a good few days before I have a stomach for meat again. You have no idea what that poor girl looked like, Doctor, and you may thank your lucky stars you don't. It's a sight a man would never forget if he had lived to be 100. That's what people don't understand when they go on at the police. No one wants this devil locked up worse than we do. God only knows what he'll dream up to his cat this. God only knows what he'll dream up to his cat this. But one thing is sure, we're the ones who are going to have to go down and look at it. For a minute or two, we sat silently thinking our separate thoughts. Then almost audibly, Lestrade began again. Then that's not the worst of it either. We had to keep it from the press. But it can't hurt to tell you, there's one final horror. What can be worse than this? The girl was pregnant. My God, 3 months, gone, and the room cut up like cat's meat. I felt an icy finger touch my spine. He must have killed twice on the same spot. What was that? Nothing of importance, but tell me, what paths of inquiry are you following? The paths of inquiry? The detective laughed hollowly. Paths of inquiry? What paths? There are no paths. No one came and no one saw him come. No one saw him go. One old whore heard someone cry out and then went back to sleep in Dorset Street. Folks screaming and yelling is like the birds singing down in Kent. What are we supposed to do? We're not second-sighted, you know. Did the killer leave no clue to his identity? Nothing. There was no clay pipe, but it must have belonged to anyone. I don't think the girl was too particular about the company she kept, if you take my meaning. Apart from the fact that there was some female clothing and the furniture, unless he burnt something in the fireplace. Funny thing that the ashes were still warm, and when we got in there, he must have had some quite a blaze going on. I can't see why something like that could attract attention, which you think would be the last thing he'd have wanted. I gestured langily, as Holmes was I gestured longingly, as Holmes was wont to do. I see no great problem there, my dear fellow. The murderer must no doubt lit the fire for the usual excellent reasons. It was none too warm this morning, outside the police station at any rate. And if the killer removed the outer garments before mutilating the body, I presume he must, then he would certainly have wished to heat the room. Besides, he would have needed an extra illumination. One cannot perform a satisfactory dissection, even of a crude nature, by the light of a single candle. I smiled at Lestrade, who was staring at me curiously. A candle? said he. Did I say anything about a candle? It was an uncomfortable moment. My dear Lestrade, I mean, surely one may assume with some confidence that such a hovel as the papers describe is unlikely to have the gas laid in. What? The official gazed at me blankly. Then he shook his head as if to clear it and rose from his chair. That's what this job does to you, he complained. The next thing you know, I'll be suspecting you, Doctor. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! Ha ha! Oh, that's rich. Well, thank you kindly. Thank you kindly for the refreshment. I won't keep you any longer. Give Mr. Holmes my best wishes for his grand tour. Who is this M anyway? Oh, that's just a chipper. He means the murderer. Ah, yes, of course. Well, good night. I sat up for a full hour after Lestrade left, reflecting on what he told me, and what I'd already knew, and what I thought I knew, but without finding any way out of my quandary. In the morning I renewed my efforts and eventually hammered out a solution that was to satisfy me for the next few days. It was hinged on the fact that although I had seen Holmes disfiguring the woman's corpse, I had not seen him actually killing her. Might it not be the mutilation on the face of it, so damning, was in truth a necessary part of Holmes' plan for trapping the real killer, Professor Moriarty? Suppose Holmes had been unable to prevent the Miller's court murderer, but had seen a way of bringing a killer to justice. Suppose this involved mutilating the corpse to a degree undreamed of, even by the professor. If this were the case, my friend's stony, unemotional nature would not have faltered. He would have weighed the greater good against the lesser evil, and done whatever was needful. It was true that I could by no means see how the extent of the victim's injuries could possibly affect the capture of her killer. But then Holmes' designs were habitual, far beyond my understanding. At any rate, this explanation provides a reasonable and characteristic key to a set of circumstances which otherwise seemed inexplicable. And part 2 of chapter 4 shall continue next week. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye for now.